Ofer Israeli, welcome to the podcast.
Nice to meet you, Robby. Thank you for having me.
You are the founder and the chief executive officer of a really cool company called Illusive. And I was doing my research, not necessarily on Elusive, but on deception technology as a whole. I'm eating breakfast and watching YouTube. I come across an advertisement from 2014, and it was not your company, some other company, but they were like, ever since the dark ages, military leaders have been using deception to gain an advantage on the battlefield. And it was really interesting, right? It's very true. And the bad guys, they use deception to get us to click on links and whatnot. So my first question to you is, how did Elusive come to be, and why did it take so long, since deception's always been a part of the battlefield?
Yeah, absolutely. So several years ago, we looked at the problem of the world of nation states and other cyber criminals, and what we notice is that there's a pretty severe problem of both false negatives and false positives in detecting these types of attacks. We found that many solutions out there are built with kind of a reactive mindset, and you need to see something in the past in order to recognize it today. And if that's the way it's built, then clearly we're behind because we're always playing catch up, right? So we miss the most severe of attacks, right? We catch some of the less interesting stuff, but the things that can really break you down, we found are getting by all of the defenses. So that was kind of number one. And number two, at the same time, the SOCs of the world, the security operations centers of the world, were being bombarded, and still are, by tons and tons and tons of false positives. And given all that noise, even if you were lucky enough to detect something, very likely it would get lost in all that noise and you wouldn't even see it. And so we basically asked ourselves, is there a way where we can do something different? Is there a different paradigm we can bring to the table where we're able to, one, reverse that asymmetrical situation between attackers and defenders and say, hey, instead of us playing catch up, can we actually set the rules of the game and have the attackers react to us instead of us to them to solve for the false negative problem? And at the same time, are we able to do it in a way where it would be invisible to any regular user inside the organization, but very much in line of sight of an attacker? And if that's the case, you achieve this fantastic signal to noise ratio. And guess what? You can actually rely on the alerts that you see, which is a pretty imperative and critical thing. So that's how it came to be. It is true, as you said, that deception has been around and used in many different forms for many, many years. It's certainly been used a lot in military warfare from ancient ages all the way to today. And we can all read interesting novels or see cool movies about things that are done through deception. And the same goes for the digital realm. There's no reason that we shouldn't be utilizing the same kind of concepts and same kind of technology and ideas to better thwart attacks in the digital era.
Did you come from the blue side then, before your time in Elusive?
I worked for Check Point indeed, so building defenses for many years of different forms and different fashions. Yep.
Yeah, what was it? I saw something about an atomic something on your CV as well. What was that?
That's right. So prior to my endeavor here in computer science in the world of security, I was in the physics world and researching quantum mechanics, both on the practical side and theoretical side for a while.
Quantum mechanics.
Yep.
Cool. But deception technology, when you started with it, what were you thinking?
So essentially, the way we utilize deception, and deception also, I should maybe dispel something, it's also been around in the digital area for quite a while. So it's been used for cyber for, 20 years. But these last 20 years, the majority of how people thought about deception was really honeypot-based approaches. To go to say, if I'm able to attract an attacker somehow and they land in my honeypot somehow, then I can now research him, study him, kind of watch the fish in the fishbowl. And the advantage there is that you can research him, you can see what's going on, you can see what he's trying to do, and so on, which is pretty neat and pretty cool and nice concept. But on the flip side of that, it requires a very, very mature security program. You've got to get, all of your basics down in order to be able to utilize such advanced capabilities. And when we were starting, as I mentioned earlier, we were saying, hey, we're not, as an industry, we're not great at detecting threats. And we can help our clients just detect in a better way before they go on to research and do all that kind of fancy stuff. So what we did is we did endpoint-based deception, which essentially says that kind of the equivalent of the honeypot is you take a brush of honey and you paint all of your real assets with that honey. Every machine, every server, every endpoint, everything has deceptive artifacts on it. And when an attacker is trying to find his way and move laterally across the network, he encounters all of these deceptive artifacts. And if he ever touches any of them, we can detect that with very high fidelity.
So would you say that the early days of deception technology was basically just they were honeypots?
Yep, 100%. The early days were honeypots, and then many of the companies that spun out a few years ago also took a kind of a honeypot 2.0 approach. Took the concept of honeypots, made them better honeypots, easier to deploy, easier to manage, and things of the sort. And again, there is value there, 100%. We took a very different approach to say, you need to detect better. Before you get into these very fancy things, you got to get your detection down. You got to have a good way to do that, and that's where we focus.
So, I mean, how useful is that technology today for a SOC?
It does what it's advertised. It doesn't alert you much, so you don't chase the system every day, day in, day out. But on the flip side of that, when it does alert, it's alerts that really matter and alerts that have typically gone by your other defenses. Actually, one of our biggest sources of pride is, the best way to check the efficacy of the solution is to bring in a red team and simulate an attack. And we've been up against over 140 red teams to date. We have a record of over 140 to 0. We always detect the red teams 100% of the time. And many of our clients, report that year after year, the red teams come in and win, and it's not a great moment for them. And here they are now, after deploying Illusive, that they can actually see the red team's activity and stop the red team in their tracks before they're able to achieve their objectives.
Is that because you're hanging on to the places in the network where an attacker would get a foothold?
Well, we're everywhere. The concept has been on the deception side. It's called deceptions everywhere, and that's essentially it is what it says. We deploy it across everything in the environment because reality is you can't control where the attacker will come in from, right? Maybe lands in some unmonitored server or unpatched server. Maybe it's a phishing campaign. Maybe it's social engineering that gets into a certain endpoint. You don't know where he starts, and your most precious asset is time. You got to detect this thing quickly. You got to detect him on his first move, on his second move, and not wait for him to get close to, the vicinity of your crown jewels when it's typically just too late. People scramble, they're nervous, they make mistakes, and bad things can happen. So you gotta stop him very early in the attack life cycle, and hence we spread across the full organization.
And does that mean like you have to deploy agents and sensors everywhere? Is that pretty much how it works?
So it's agentless technology, which means that we're able to actually run on an endpoint in a server, but we run the 200 to 300 milliseconds it takes to learn the machine, plant deceptive artifacts, which are static data points, and then we self-dissolve from the machine. We leave the machine entirely, leave nothing running behind, and then we periodically revisit that machine. So we keep it fresh and we change it over time, but it's not anything persistent, which is important from a deception standpoint because hey, if you're deceiving an attacker, you don't want him to know that you're there. You don't want him to know that there's deceptive artifacts on these machines, right?
Can you go a little bit further into that? The whole you keep saying artifacts, and what is that? What's an example of that?
Well, it's built into two buckets. Bucket number one is identities. So we know that pretty much every attack out there goes through privileged identity. So you basically, as an attacker, you land inside the environment. Your next objective is get to a privileged identity, and then once you have that, you can do whatever you want to do. And so the first form is that we deceive on many types of users, and whether it's domain admins or enterprise admins or other privileged accounts or non-privileged accounts, which also fool the attacker in their privilege escalation lateral movement kind of method. So that's a big focus right there, and that could be things like planting deceptive identities in Windows memory, or planting it in your browser that allows you to, in your saved sites that you access different sites and things of that nature. The second bucket is the bucket of pathways to crown jewels. So we also plan deceptive connections to point the attacker towards systems that aren't really real, but they look real and the trails look real. And again, as an attacker, if I'm carrying out a sophisticated attack, what I want to do is not just spray the organization, try to connect to everything. I'm going to follow the real trails and real paths that already exist. And if I've, as now as elusive, I've been able to lay out these deceptive paths and deceptive identities that look real and feel real and smell real, an attacker utilizing them actually trips himself, and we can detect that activity.
And so basically you must have worked with a lot of red teams to sort of figure out those paths and how an attacker would look at them, correct?
We have a lot of actual attacking experience. So many of our people were in the military working for the government, essentially carrying out some of these attacks for the government, basically. So they know what these things look like, pretty sophisticated attacks. That's kind of on the one side. But then secondly, absolutely, through every red team exercise, while we're proud of the fact that we always stop them, it's rare that we don't learn something from a red team exercise. We see other things they're doing. It pushes us to continue to evolve and develop additional kind of capabilities and kind of push the envelope. As an example, an attack that's been utilized widely for the last several years, also by red teams and real attackers, is Kerberos thing. So, we'll do things of that nature so that we can actually stop and, keep up to the threat landscape and stop the things that are irrelevant today.
Because I'm assuming that if an attacker gets into your network, they want to be as quiet as possible, right? Is there a moment in time when they actually do figure out that they're being deceived themselves, or is it like invisible for them?
Well, they could. Essentially, even when they connect to any deceptive element, then we basically give them responses that they would expect. So as an example, if I, and as an attacker now, try to consume and try to authenticate with a deceptive user, then what I might see is access denied or permission denied. And so that's a plausible response. My story to myself could be, well, I found this user and these credentials, which is great. They're probably outdated and the user has probably changed his credentials, and hence I'm getting permission denied. It makes sense. Now, over time, they probably will recognize the fact that they're being deceived because nothing works for them. But one, that's a good day, right? Because we've stopped them in the meantime in their activity. And two, because the system keeps adapting and changing over time, then if they opt to go back to the environment and try to attack the organization again, they're going to be confronted with different types of deceptions. And that's true both kind of on a time horizon and across all of our organizations. The system knows how to learn automatically and configure and basically lay out deceptions that are in the context of that specific organization and that specific time. So you won't find two elusive customers that have the same deceptions. It looks different in every environment, and you bring that back a second to the attacker lens, and that becomes really complicated because it's not something I can learn, put in my lab, learn it, figure it out, and then I know what I'm going to be up against. I can learn it, but the data I'm going to see in my target organization is going to look different every time. So it's complicated to figure out what do I do with that.
So you accomplish two things. You basically you lengthen the amount of effort and time that an attacker has to use on you to achieve their goal, and you're also learning something in the meantime about their TTPs or whatever, right? How does this hang together with EDR and CM and all the other fun stuff, abbreviations that we use in security?
Pick your favorite three letters.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's another layer on top of that, right? So we're not, instead of an EDR, we encourage all organizations to have robust endpoint security, stop, all of the low-hanging fruit that they can. With that said, what we stop is the really high impact attacks. So things that will get by your EDR. And, we've seen, several cases. Think SolarWinds, right? How many times did they bypass the EDRs altogether? Very frequently, right? So EDR is not the ultimate solution to solve for all problems. It does a good job at what it's intended to do, but there's more that needs to be done, primarily from a lateral movement perspective. So the endpoint security solutions, they kind of protect the host. That's their focus. That's where they put their attention, their investment, and that's important. But also, we should assume the day that the attacker is actually on the host successfully and is trying to move across the environment. And we got to also think about that and figure out, how do we look at the graph of the environment, not only in a certain machine, but the whole environment, and stop the attacker from accessing different systems and different users and making their way laterally across the environment.
I heard about it from a bank. I would assume that is there like a certain size a client has to be able to, it's all about priority and focus, right? But your typical clients, what do they look like? They're larger, right? They have a very advanced program.
So it varies. We see different strategies. So, very roughly on the very large side of things, we see this as another layer to augment many other things that they're doing. And they want to get better protection specifically around lateral movement. And on the lower end of things, it's clients that say, hey, I'd love to do the fancy stuff. I'd love to do a SIM. I'd love to do an EDR and things of that nature. But you know what? With one person or two people or three people on my security team, I can't manage the amount of alerts these things produce. I can't configure all of the use cases and everything that needs to be done to get a successful SIM and all that stuff. And so I'm putting in Illusive as a solution to provide this high efficacy, low touch type of solution, so that it's something I can actually operate and be my really, my detection fabric.
On my side of the world, right? In Norway, we have, a lot of we don't have that many big enterprises, right? We're in a small and medium business country. And I would assume that, we were talking about earlier, like, I guess the bigger the security team, the better to be able to use deception technology, right? So I would assume that in this part of the world, it'd be very helpful to have a managed service provider, some security company that's going to help you do this, right? What is your experience working with them? Like, how are they able to actually deal with all the alerts and actually be able to advise the clients on these sort of situations? What's your experience with that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would say I think the managed security providers are doing a great thing for the world, because as we know, some of the smaller companies, they just can't handle the amount of tools and the things they need, not things they want, the things they need in order to actually securely operate their business. So I think the managed security providers of the world, and certainly yourselves, are doing a great job in actually helping clients achieve what they need to achieve. In general, it's actually a very lucrative thing for managed security providers, deception technology, and the reason is it goes back to kind of the high efficacy or high fidelity of alerts. When you think about managed security providers, and certainly you know this better than I do, it's all based on can we scale the analyst time, right? Can I ensure that an analyst can cover various different clients and do so in a cost-effective manner, so that I can actually look at the things that matter and actually protect my organization, protect my customers without spinning up huge teams, which doesn't make any business sense. And so that's where a very high fidelity solution is very beneficial to MSSPs and DRs, because they're able to say, you know what, my analysts are not going to be alerted often. They're going to be alerted when it matters. So I can take on more clients and more endpoints and more work, because I know I'll get the signals I need, and I won't be chasing ghosts day in, day out with things that really don't matter and don't make any sense.
I could see a situation where, let's say, an alarm goes off in our SOC, right? And our SOC is going to sit there and say, hey, Elusive is telling us that there's something happening here. And they're calling the client, and the client's like, well, cut it. And we're like, well, don't you want to see where they're going? Have you heard any stories about that? So it's like, if I was a CISO and I got that phone call, I would just be like, I would be super scared just to let them run and just watch them, right?
I think you're right. I think you're right. I think it is a scary thing. At the end of the day, if you let the attackers run wild in your environment, then maybe everything ends well, and maybe if something goes bad, it could be a lot more damage and a lot more concerning. And there's things always, they look more sterile before an attack goes on than while an attack is actually in progress. And, if you really want to study the attacker, really play with him, you got to make sure your board supports this, has the risk appetite to do this thing, understands the benefits, also understands the risks of doing these types of things. And hence we encourage really only a select few clients to even think about that kind of realm. And for the most part, it's really about, we see an attack, let's figure out the root cause. First of all, let's figure out where the attacker is inside the environment. Where else is he? Because he certainly has multiple footholds usually. And then what's the root cause? Get rid of the attacker, fix for the root cause, and move on. Like, let's not increase the risk that is associated with that attack so nothing bad actually does happen.
Interesting. You mentioned earlier identities. And I don't know why. I feel like identity doesn't get that much attention in the security and the normal security like conferences and whatnot, just the normal security talk. What is your take on how does that hang together with your story, with the deception?
Attackers are utilizing identity in every attack, and I really mean every attack. You think about how attackers operate. It used to be very much, how do I find a 0 day and how do I just run this exploit across the environment? And what attackers have figured out over these last several years is, heck, why do I need to invest all this research, time, effort in finding 0 days, and when using them actually get some attribution to myself as well? When I can live off the land, I can get real identities. It's a lot easier. It's a lot stealthier, and I don't expose myself. And so attackers are now very much living off the land and utilizing identities. And so that's definitely happening in the threat landscape for the last several years.
What are some of the issues that you've mentally noted in your dealings with that, around that for enterprises?
Well, it's quite a wide variety, but we see a lot of different types of identity risks, which are actually quite severe. So things we see are privileged accounts like domain admins or enterprise admins or the such, their credentials being stored in memory in different machines. A help desk admin logs in remotely to a machine to do some of his work, and when he closes that remote desktop window, his credentials remain on that other machine. That's left behind until the next reboot occurs. That happens very frequently. And then an attacker landing on that machine suddenly has access to this, important and privileged help desk admin. We see lots and lots of shadow administrators. So you think about the users which aren't perceived to be privileged, but through a bunch of group memberships and misconfigured access control lists, they're actually a lot stronger than what you might think. And so we see a lot of those, which are hard to identify. We see lots of issues with service accounts, Kerberostable service accounts. So they have a static password, which might not have been changed for the last 15 years. And yet we see people, they have interactive logon capabilities, and people are using it to actually log on to various machines, and again, leaving their credentials left behind, or using weak encryption and things of that nature. So there's quite a wide variety. Access tokens to the cloud, very common. DevOps person stores those access tokens on his machines or in the CI/CD pipeline, and suddenly you have unrestricted access to your AWS environment or whatever the case may be. So there's actually quite a wide array of things that we see, which would surprise you, like how much of that is actually out there.
Well, actually, doesn't. I mean, if you think about a large company, right? That's of course there's going to be a bunch of those mistakes, right? Because there's just holes in procedures, and people just make mistakes. That's how we are. And if they're not really looking at it, I guess if they don't have a tool to look for exactly those mistakes, and could definitely see it happening.
Absolutely, especially now. Everybody's talking about the Great Resignation, right? Lots of people leaving and switching jobs and all that. That just exasperates the problem, right? Because then you have more provisioning, more deprovisioning, more configuration issues, and when you need to do more mistakes happen. And so you have to have this capability to actually assure that the things that you've done are correct and that there aren't these issues left behind. That's kind of where we fit in.
Specifically, how does identity tie into the deception part? Do you actually put more deception focus on certain identities than others, perhaps?
We think identity risk is the biggest risk organizations have today. We think that without solving for getting to better kind of identity hygiene, fixing those problems, and being able to detect bad activity as pertains to identities, then that's a huge hole, and organizations will absolutely be breached because of those things, and we see it every day, right? So the way we think about it is what organizations really need is a capability to discover identity risk, to mitigate that risk, and then to protect against that risk. And so the approach we've taken is we have this kind of independent tool that surveys every machine inside your environment, surveys the big systems like Active Directory, Azure Active Directory, your PAM solution, so on and so forth, brings it all together and then says, well, you intended for your policy to be A, but you're actually at B. And that gap is, we can kind of color that gap and show you where you have that risk on the discover side. So first of all, gain visibility to see what's out there. Then on the mitigation side, and we've seen this across, all different sectors and different approaches in security, is it isn't enough to just tell you have a problem. We've got to help our customers fix that problem because everybody, has a skills shortage. There aren't enough people. There isn't enough time. And so we automatically remediate many of those risks. Things like if we find credentials stored in memory in various machines of privileged accounts in places where they shouldn't be, we'll go out and get rid of those. If we find access tokens to the cloud in places it shouldn't be, we'll go out and automatically clean those out. So the second portion is that automatic mitigation, remediation. And then finally, you're a business and you're gonna be left with some risk, whether you like it or not. There's still gonna be usage of privileged accounts in your environment. There's still gonna be some of that risk that is left behind. And so that's where deception comes in and layers in those deceptive identities and deceptive artifacts as a compensating control to monitor for any bad activity that happens as relates to that risk that you're incurring.
Interesting. You have a very secretive organization that has a huge security team, then you have an APT on the other side, right? Could it be like that APT gets into that organization and then your technology tips them off that they're there? Can you go into your product live and change things so it's you can control them where to go and you can learn things along the way? Is it two people sitting on the other sides of the fence working against each other sort of situation?
Yeah, so part of the beauty is you have a wide range of options. So you can go as far as the advanced capabilities that you just mentioned, actually lead the attacker down certain trails if you want to figure out, learn what is he after? Is he after financial data?
Exactly,
is he after, is it intellectual property? Is it, whatever the case may be. You can lead them down certain trails to kind of learn more what he's after. What we find, honestly, is that most organizations don't want to get into the game of actually playing with the attacker too much. What they need is a way to detect very early, very precisely, and then, get rid of the threat, right? So that's what most of our customers opt to do. Some more advanced ones and some in, work governments and things of that nature, they'll actually take that kind of more sophisticated approach and actually try to figure out the attacker.
Do you have any closing thoughts, any shout outs you'd like to give to the listeners of your potentially future clients?
What I would encourage all clients is to keep pushing the envelope. Let's not just stay with all of the traditional and historic things that we've done and, keep behind, because the attackers are certainly moving forward. And if we don't push the envelope as well on the security industry side, we're going to be left behind. That's not a good spot to be in. So I always encourage clients, be as fast as the attackers, be close to as fast as the attackers. You have a fighting chance, right? That's where you need to be.
Well, thank you for your time today. First of all, I'm actually going to call that bank friend of mine, and I'm going to try to get them on here and so they can tell us about how they've experienced it.
Next time we should chat, the three of us.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Probably should have done that the first time. But hey, next time.
Yep.
Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you, Robbie.
Best
Great
of
chatting
luck.
with you.
I'm going to buy your stocks once they're out there. Ciao.